how to actually interact with that student to make your learning process the best that it can be. So for this question, right, do I think about embouchure or do I think about breathing? I don't think about embouchure unless we're buzzing or we're playing on the instrument. Otherwise, I just think about air, right? And it's important to kind of have these steps in the process pedagogically, and then each of these things that feel kind of unnatural to a student eventually start to become second nature, right? And ultimately, that's what we're doing as a music educator, especially if you're teaching an applied instrument, right? You're taking all these totally foreign concepts, breathing from your stomach. You only do that when you sleep or when you yawn, right? Otherwise, we always chest breathe. So you take these foreign concepts and then you try and turn them into something that the student just does every time they pick up their instrument, right? So I think generally, I don't think about embouchure unless I'm talking about embouchure or buzzing, and I don't think about air unless we're doing breathing exercises, but each of these things get addressed as they need to get addressed, right? Certain students will have persistent issues that arise, and then you'll kind of have to take those issues and police them the best that you can in every single lesson, but it's easy to get sidetracked, as I just did answering that question. The next thing, this is a super duper important thing, and I want to say this, and this is maybe one of the last dry things I'll say, and then I want some more questions and to kind of maybe tell some stories. But probably the most important fundamental to understand after you talk about air, after you talk about buzz, after you talk about staying relaxed, right, is contrary motion. Contrary motion is when you go up in pitch, you buzz down into the cup, and when you go down in pitch, you go up into the cup. You blow up into the cup. So if you see me buzz a siren, and I'm not talking about here to here, I'm just talking about if this is dead even straight down the lead pipe, right, I'm ever so slightly tilting up or down. Now, if I buzz a siren, you'll see what I'm talking about. I started blowing straight down, and as I went up, I started to blow a little bit down, and then I readjusted, right? And the same thing would happen if I started high and went low. Right? It's a really, really easy thing to do, but what it does is it keeps the buzz completely intact, and it makes your sound very even, regardless of how high or low you're playing something. See if I have any more questions related to that. Good question. Why is creating a good sound, important to the other fundamentals? Creating a good sound on these instruments typically means that you're approaching the horn in a really healthy manner. I used to have a lot of tension in my upper register especially, and I used to have a lot of tension in my low register as well. And, the older I get and the more I perform and I play, I realize that if you play in a really physical manner where you're kind of applying a lot of pressure on your face with the mouthpiece, or you're forcing a lot of air, trying to push with your throat and flexing your jaw and your face, if you don't injure yourself, which is possible, you could strain one of the muscles in your face, you're very, very likely to experience a lot of fatigue. There's a very famous story of a trumpet player, I won't say who played in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra for many, many years, and there was a guest conductor, and he was this world-famous trumpet player, but he could not play in the rehearsal because it takes him about 6 hours to warm up because all of his face had become scar tissue because he used a lot of pressure and he physically moved around the horn instead of having a relaxed approach, relying on the air, having a good quality buzz. And the conductor yelled at him in the rehearsal, and then at the concert, that trumpet player played very loud and pointed his bell right at the conductor. So it's something that you know, I was worried about injuring myself, and I was worried about my approach, and then I started to kind of reassess some of how I'm playing the horn. I was able to play high and low and fast and slow, but it wasn't always my best sound, and my face was getting tired. I mean, I almost injured myself before a major competition that I was competing in, and ever since then, I've slowly started to work away from that approach because I want my career to last as long as possible. I don't have any other questions right now, but before I talk some more serious specifics about tuba and how to perform and all this stuff, I want to talk about why music education is important and why having an inner song is important to any musician, whether you're teaching or performing or both. Music education, to me, offers me as the teacher the opportunity to positively impact people's lives, right? Because what you learn by learning an instrument and learning an instrument well is how you learn, so your learning process, and how to apply that to everything in your life. And I am literally a more successful, better person because I am a more successful musician. So when I'm teaching, whether it's a middle school student or a high school student or collegiate student, I put 110% of myself in every time. And when the student puts, that much of themselves or almost that much of themselves in as well, there's something so inspiring about that because all of a sudden the student will see progress and then move from where they were to where they want to go, And there's nothing that motivates a student to practice more than progress. Now, how do we relate that to the inner song? This is something I've talked about before at the beginning of the lecture. It's on my sheet that I've included here today. The inner song is how you sing something in your head. If you don't sing with the sound concept and the phrasing and the style and the articulation, the dynamics, everything that you want to do, that's not what's going to come out the bell. I've heard this. This is such a great quote that my teacher Tim Northcutt used to say from Cincinnati Conservatory. But he used to tell me all the time, it's not important whether you play fast or high or whatever, right? Technique is great, but you have to make your best sound all the time or no one wants to hear it. And the tuba is simply an amplifier, right? This is the acoustic guitar. This is the chord. This is the amplifier. So I try to take what's in my head and put it out through the bell rather than trying to physically control what I'm doing with my face or control with what I'm doing with the horn. Because the horn doesn't want to be controlled. The horn just wants to play whatever you're playing in your head at a louder volume. I think I have a couple other good questions here. Here's a good one. When selecting instruments for students, what are some key factors for selecting beginner low brass students, and same for high brass students? That's awesome. This is something that I think a lot of students, when they're first getting their first job and they're working as a band director, it's kind of trial and error a lot of the time. But to me, I can't encourage people enough to do the research on quality brands. I don't want to be biased right now, but affordable instruments that are really great for high school students, Miraphone, BNS, and Yamaha make some really great instruments. There's other brands that are also awesome, but they're just going to be more expensive. And then the same goes for middle school students. And you kind of have to think about it when you purchase, let's say you purchase 6 tubas or you purchase 3 tubas, and then 5 years later you purchase 3 more tubas. If you want some kind of like continuity of the section sound, so you want each player to kind of sound like each other and to kind of have this group section sound, you need to make sure that you actually purchase the same model instrument. One thing that really bums me out when I've gone and done master classes is I'll see a row of tubas in the back of the band, and over the course of 10 years or 20 years, there's been 2 or 3 different band directors, and they've purchased 6 different tubas. And so one kid sounds drastically different from another student because one kid's playing on 3-valve piston horn and one kid's playing on a 5-valve rotor horn. And if your students want to purchase their own horns, that's great and that's awesome. But in general, most students are using school-owned horns, and you want to try and get some kind of homogenized sound. And the easiest way to do that is by getting horns that are all the same model and make, or at least the same instrument company and the same type of design. Mouthpieces are trickier, though. I'll say that. The general rule, if you look at mine, right, mine's kind of bowl-shaped here. The deeper the cup, so from the lip or the rim of the mouthpiece to the shank, the deeper that cup, the warmer and fuller or darker that sound is going to be. And then depending on the rim, that can also change some things. So this rim, this is a Parentucci PT50 mouthpiece. The rim is not specifically sharp. Some mouthpieces are specifically designed to have a sharp rim, because if you're sitting in the back of an orchestra for 45 minutes and then you play the final movement of an orchestra or a symphony orchestra, and you have to play basically cold, some people prefer more grip. I also know that it's partially dependent on your skin makeup. If you have a more oily complexion, you want probably something that's a little sharper, grip. And if you have a drier complexion, you probably want something that's rounded. I'm kind of in between oily and dry for my skin, but comfortability, I prefer something that's rounded. It just is less fatiguing, and I play a lot. I play 3 to 5 hours a day most days if I can. So I want something that's not going to add any other fatigue than I'm already going to experience, right? So that's something to take into account. For marching band, if you guys are doing 50 reps or something, get rounded rim mouthpieces. Your kids are going to be thanking you. Here's another awesome question. What are your thoughts on starting younger, smaller beginning students on tuba versus starting them on euphonium and moving them to tuba as they can handle the instrument? Unfortunately, because of the size of tuba, it boils down to the size of the student and the size of the tubas that you actually have, right? Some tubas, like the tuba that I have here, are very, very large, right? This tuba is incredibly large. This is hard for adults to hold. But if you have, they do make 3/4 tubas that are specifically designed for middle school students. And so I say 3/4. This is a term, it's kind of a spurious term. It's not really a well-defined term. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. But there's 3/4, 4/4, 5/4, and 6/4 tubas. So the smaller quarter size, 3/4, 4/4, is typically going to be easier to hold by middle school and high school students. And then 4, 5, and are going to be easy to hold for high school students. And then 6, you're probably going to need a tuba stand. So if you want to start a kid, or if a kid goes to an instrument petting zoo and they love tuba and they want to start it, but it's way too big for them, purchase them, or have their parents purchase them, a tuba stand. It's so easy to use. It's so easy to design. They're just these tripod feet stands, and they have this little cup that basically holds the bow of the tuba within it. But you always want to bring the instrument to the student's face and not the student to the instrument. Because if you do that, if you bring the student to the instrument, right, their back is going to get flexed, and then they're going to start doing stuff funky, and they're probably going to start having some pain related to holding the instrument. Another good high school question. What guidance would you give to a great high school tuba player who is bored with his or her band parts? Take lessons, practice scales, practice etudes, learn etudes, and seek out other musical opportunities, right? Beyond the fact that there's like honor bands basically in every state, right? Or all state bands in every state. You could start a brass quintet with your friends. You could start a tuba euphonium quartet with your friends. You could attend tuba conferences. There's really cheap rates to attend tuba conferences, and regional conferences are usually like 3 hours or less to drive to, depending on where they happen. They kind of rotate. But you can go and, you know, perform and stuff. And there's also local tuba Christmases, which are kind of these like masked tuba ensembles that happen at Christmas that play Christmas carols. And then there's Octuba Fests, which sometimes are interactive and sometimes it's just a concert to go attend. But my encouragement is to, you know, start with lessons, and then whatever the suggestions of that person is to do is what you should start doing, you know, because there's so many musical opportunities just waiting for people, and you never know. A perfect example, when I was in college, you know, I was always frustrated that in summers I didn't have anything musically inclined going on. I had a 9-to-5 job that I worked to make money for college, and I practiced, but that was it. And there was no goals, and there was no learning, and there was nothing special or exciting about that. And there was this really wonderful program. It only happened for, I think, 5 or 6 years, called Low Brass Boot Camp. But it was an opportunity. You know, you pay a couple $100, and it used to be hosted. Actually, its final year was hosted at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and you'd go there and you'd get to study with some of the best tuba euphonium teachers and players from around the world. And that was just such an inspiring, fun experience, learning every day, playing every day, performing a couple times throughout the week, hearing other students play who are really good from all across the country and Canada. It was just such an incredible experience. And there's programs like that. There's the BNS Tuba Workshop that happens out in Oklahoma. There's the Miraphone Academy. There's STU, I think, is still a thing in the Southeast. There's all these different happenings in summer. You just gotta Google it and find it, you know. But there's some really, really great opportunities out there that I think a lot of kids don't know about, and then all of a sudden they're in college and, you know, they find out they've missed out on 5 years of incredible experiences from learning and playing. We have a couple other questions here. At the end, okay. What is the most important thing you can share with young low brass players? Take lessons. Listen to professional recordings. I started as a euphonium player. I was not a tuba player. I was a euphonium player in high school, middle school, high school, and even part of college. And I really didn't listen to any classical music at all until I was in probably the sophomore, junior year of high school. And I only listened to euphonium players. And then when I was in college, you know, I was like a sophomore, music major, and I didn't know anything. People would reference Beethoven and reference this or that, and I mean, I've heard the names, but I wasn't familiar with the literature. So my encouragement is to start listening as soon as possible to, you know, some kind of great tuba or euphonium or trombone recording, and then start to branch out. You know, if there's like, you know, if you hear like the Mozart, Leopold Mozart trombone concerto, and you're like, man, I love that, go listen to his son, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. I mean, it's something so simple to do, but I think it's something that a lot of students need some guidance on. But once they catch, the bug, it's really addicting to listen to great classical music all the time. I did hours and hours and hours every day, and I still listen to music every day. So I would take lessons and I would listen to music. Okay, I have a really good question. Can I explain misconceptions with air support for differing instruments, aka flute versus tuba? So my wife, as I've mentioned, is a flutist. She plays in a couple of different orchestras. As far as inhalation goes, there's not an awful lot difference between flute and tuba. That's kind of a bad example for inhalation because they have no resistance on their instrument, and it's basically a 3.5-foot tube, so the air just immediately disappears. So breathing-wise, there are some similarities between tuba and flute, actually, because of the back pressure for tuba and then no back pressure for flute. But you can't go up to an oboe player and tell them to take this huge breath, right? And so this is something that, as a music education major or someone who's a music educator working in the field, you have to start probably really playing the instruments to understand what's an appropriate breath for X instrument. I think for low brass, it's especially important to get the full capacity of your lungs, especially for someone like me who's not that tall. But for horn and trumpet, you definitely need to get a great breath, but you also have to start, being mature about it. Like if you're trying to make a very long phrase, then don't take a small breath. But if you're trying to, play a very short phrase and then you have, 5 more measures of rest, you don't need to take more air than you need, right? So that's why doing that beginner breathing exercise of 4 in, 4 out, 3, 3, 2, 2, 1, 1, 8 is really important because it actually not only teaches students how to breathe, but it teaches them awareness about how much they have in their lungs and how much is left, right? Because the point is you're supposed to get evenly to the end of 4 and evenly out to the end of 4. Right? I'm not totally full or totally empty to the very end of that count. And so that's something that you can start to apply as needed to different phrases. Playing contrabass tuba, especially a 6-quarter contrabass tuba, and because of my height, I'm taking pretty large breaths most of the time. But in general, I think you just have to be aware of what that instrument does and then what the needs are of the music, right? And that's probably one of my absolute favorite pieces of advice was from my teacher at the Cincinnati Conservatory. He would tell me, you're breathing for you and you're not breathing for the phrase. And what that means is, if you're singing a song, happy birthday to you, you can't just breathe happy birthday to, right? Because what it does is it chops up the text, it chops up the words, it chops up what you're saying to your audience. And so as a tuba player, it's really important to think about, what are you saying and where is it appropriate to breathe? And so you have to listen to the phrase and breathe where the phrase dictates. So usually after long tied notes or rests or after some kind of cadential figure. What are some good etude books and solo collections for younger tubists? This is an awesome question. A lot of times you'll get this huge list. If you go to like the International Tuba Euphonium Association website, they have this huge annotated bibliography of basically everything that's ever been written for tuba and ever written for euphonium, and it's a little overwhelming. It's like, where do you start, right? My personal favorite for exercise books, and there are some short songs within these, for very beginning students are the Standard of Excellence and the Rubank book. The elementary Rubank book and the elementary standard of excellence are awesome for like 5th graders, 6th graders. And then when you move on from 6th grade, 7th grade into 8th grade, you have to kind of go with the series, right? Because there's elementary, there's intermediary, and then there's advanced. So those offer different things. There's more exercises in Rubank, and there's more songs, short little songs in the Standard of Excellence. So you can kind of use those together. And then also, what you need to start doing is looking at the Voxman collections. There's H. Voxman. I don't remember his first name right now. He used to teach. He was a professor and then the chair at the music school at the University of Iowa, and he put all these amazing collections together of all different works. So the elementary Voxman for euphonium or trombone or tuba has Bach, Beethoven, and a whole bunch of other Baroque tonal composers that students could hear and start to play out of. And again, that's why it's so important to start taking lessons, because you need someone to assign, have this prepared by next week, have this prepared by next week. And so you kind of, again, have to kind of use whatever the student needs to determine what you select for that student. Here's a good question. From what instrument is the best to switch to tuba if you need more low brass players? I don't have a really strong opinion about this. And the reason why, I was a euphonium player and I went to tuba, and while that makes the most sense, I struggled with certain things an awful lot. In high school, I had a friend who was a trumpet player, a good trumpet player, and he sounded awesome on tuba. So I think, there's no right answer for what instrument should they, move from. But I would say if students are interested, encourage them. And if students, seem to have a knack for it, if you have like an instrument petting zoo or something, or even if they're just goofing around on so-and-so's horn, which is actually how that trumpet player became a tuba player. He was like, give me that sousaphone. And he started playing it. And the band director was like, hey, you sound really good, and we need more good sousaphones. So I think, as a music educator, listen to the needs of your kids, and also just listen and be open to letting, a good trumpet player go if you have a whole bunch of good trumpet players, which is what we had in my high school. We had maybe 10 strong trumpet players for a high school band program, and we didn't really need, 10. But we only had like one good tuba, and we need like 4 good tubas. So we had some trombones and baritone and a trumpet switch over to tuba. I have someone asking me, can I talk about my activity as a composer and how that has impacted my development as a performer? I compose. I've probably, I think at this point I've composed, had premiered, and published maybe 15, 16 works over the course of like, I don't know, like 6, 7 years. And I've had a couple of those pieces recorded on albums recently and stuff. And one of them got selected for the Falcone competition, which is like the big premier competition in the United States for tuba and euphonium. Yeah, composing is awesome. Because of all the musical things that I do, I find it to be the most humbling. Because when you compose, it forces you to organize your thoughts and structure your thoughts and get this idea and this idea to connect to one another. And as a player, what I've ended up doing is a couple of different things from that. I've taken what I've learned about myself as a composer in terms of my organization and structure, and I've applied that to my practice. So I've restructured my practice sessions in a way that has no fat on it. Right? It's like the perfect cut of steak. There's no fat on it. There's no bone in it. You know, it's been marinated to perfection, seasoned to perfection, and it's a really fit, trim cut of meat. But also what I've done is I've started to kind of reevaluate what are these composers saying, or what are they trying to get me to say, right? Not every accent is equal. An accent by Hindemith is totally different than an accent by Mozart. And so you have to apply different, historic elements to what you play, but you also need to become familiar with that composer's language. And a perfect example of this, I love the Vaughan Williams Tuba Concerto. It's an awesome concerto for tuba. It's our very first major concerto. And I've heard a lot of really wonderful tubists play it, and I think, God, they're such a good tuba player. But they didn't listen to anything else by Vaughan Williams. And so, as a composer who then started, applying what I've learned to performing, I have to ask myself, well, what is the voice of this composer, and how am I supposed to speak in this particular dialect, right? Because music is basically a language, and we need to figure out how each composer speaks, and then kind of mimic that, or personify that language. Hopefully that answered that. Here's a very good question. Besides good tuba instruction and practice habits, what other skills are important to being a great tubist? Important skills for being a musician or being a successfully hired and employable, working musician are identical to everything in life. If I wanted to be a good, famous comedian, or a great welder, or a great bus driver, or own my own store, all of those success stories require the same things. You have to work hard. You have to be honest with yourself and open to change, which is probably the thing I struggle with most. And you have to always be willing to reorganize the way that you work and you approach everything. I find my honesty with myself and my willingness with myself to challenge my existing habits and make them better habits by working on my organization of my practice routine, or the structure of my practice routine, or my mental approach. That stuff is all the same as being great at anything else. It just takes work and honest work. I have a very easy question to answer. What's my favorite tuba excerpt? My favorite tuba excerpt is from Prokofiev 5. There's a kind of this lyrical, declamatory part from that you play with the double basses, and it's beautiful. It's just a really beautiful Russian excerpt. It reminds me of a lot of lyrical etudes and arias and kind of string writing, and it's just super fun to play. I have another question. Can you talk about how you change your teaching approach with students who don't have English as their first language? This is a good question. I have a lot of friends who work in Texas. There's a lot of born Spanish-speaking students there, and they may or may not be able to converse with them in Spanish. So if I have a student who is struggling to understand English, or has a very, very basic grasp or no grasp of the English language, I try to use really concise language myself, so kind of, again, cut the fat away from whatever I'm saying, and just use very direct things, more air, and then demonstrate. And I think for students that struggle speaking English, or it's still something that they're working on, you can't rely on the language as much as you can rely on the demonstration. And I already do a lot of demonstrating anyway with students. I almost always play with them and perform for them, and demonstrate everything that I want them to accomplish while using the language that I like to use. But I end up using more of a demonstrative approach that way. How important are arrangements from other time periods for tuba players? I think it depends on the arrangement. There are many, many arrangements that are published nowadays for tuba and for euphonium that are from Baroque, Renaissance, classical, and Romantic time periods. And most of the literature for tuba and euphonium didn't start being published and created until at least around 1900. A little bit before that, but not a lot. So basically, most of our actual literature is modern. So it's a good question. How important is that literature? It depends on the arrangement, and it depends on what your goal is with that piece. There's certain arrangements that work very, very well, whether it's the key or intervals or whatever. The piece, was written for a violin, but it just sounds really great on a tuba, and it's been arranged in an idiomatic way, meaning that it lies very well for the horn, however the arrangers arranged it. But then there are pieces that don't work very well. And then there are pieces that are specifically challenging because they've been arranged by teachers for their students to target certain things that the students struggle with. So how important are they? I think they are important. I try to incorporate and have students perform pieces that are not modern at least a couple of times throughout a couple of years of study with me. For young students, I start on a lot of that literature because it's a little bit easier technically usually, and it's very tonal, so it helps train the ear and strengthen the ear to pushing the buttons down and buzzing and blowing the right note. So pedagogically, it can be very important, but it depends on what you're trying to accomplish and who the student is. All right, I've had someone ask me, can I please share some professional tubists in addition to me that we should encourage our students to listen to? There's a massive list of people that students should listen to for various reasons. If you have a student who really wants to play in an orchestra, they should be listening to Warren Deck and Chris Olka and, name another awesome orchestral tubist, right, like Gene Picorni. If you have someone who says, I want to play in a military band in the United States Military Forces, you need to try and find recordings of those people. Marty Erickson has, a solo album. You can hear his style of articulation. And there's so many people that have recordings out there, even on YouTube or Spotify nowadays. I have a couple of people I tend to gravitate towards. I'm very repertoire dependent. If I like the literature they're playing, I'm more likely to listen to their album. And that's just like a personal taste thing for me. But people, when I hear them play, I love the way that they sound. Phil Cinder has an awesome album called Aerodynamics. Velvet Brown has a great album called Simply Velvet. It's a really top-notch musical recording. There's so many. I have kind of like personal favorites, and some of them I wouldn't necessarily encourage students to listen to nowadays. You can find recordings of Arnold Jacobs and Harvey Phillips and Bill Bell and Toby Hanks, and I think that they sound awesome, but it's a little bit more raw and uncharacteristic of what we would sound like today on tuba because our instruments are larger and our pedagogy and sound concepts have changed since then. But those are awesome too to start. Same thing with Roger Bobo. Um, you know, Oystein Bodsvik's album Journey is incredible. It's all Indian music, Indian violin and tuba by this Grammy award-winning Indian composer. Really, really good. Um, Gosh, the list is just so stinking long, and there's so many. Um, People you can see live that I've seen live that have been absolutely incredible. Um, Dan Parentoni has been incredible live. Tim Northcutt, my teacher from CCM, is incredible live. Jason Smith and Marty Erickson are incredible live. Um, Gosh, there's so many. And there's all these young guys that are now great. I mean, Derek Fenstermacher, Aubrey Ford, those guys are very, very good. Um, you know, I've been lucky enough to hear a couple different albums that I review for the ITA Journal. I have one by Matt Hightower right now, which sounds great. He's the professor of tuba at Lexington. You know, there's just so many quality albums out there nowadays. And I would just encourage students to kind of start with, you know, some of the big ones, some of the big orchestral people or you know, solo people, and then just start branching out. I mean, with Spotify and having all these recordings literally at students' fingertips, there's no reason that they shouldn't be listening to basically anybody that they can find. You know, and it's up to you as a teacher to just say, hey, what are you listening to? And then if it's maybe a little outdated, tell them how it's outdated, or listen to it yourself and figure out why it's outdated, and then explain it to them. So, any more questions here? No more questions. Answered a lot of questions. Yeah, I you know, I'll leave you with this, and this is the final thing I'll say here. I've been a music educator for not terribly long, and mostly in the collegiate world and private lessons. But I have seen and worked alongside some outstanding high school and middle school band directors, elementary band directors, private lesson teachers, and collegiate professors, you know, and including the place that I work at now. There's just some really amazing people. And what I will leave you with and encourage you to do is, regardless of anything, your personal opinion, how you're feeling that day, how stressful your day has been, whatever, anytime you have an opportunity to observe someone teach or to talk to someone about teaching, do it. If you're a serious educator, everything is useful in some way, because it either informs you how you can make something you do better, how you don't want to do something, or how you might want to change something and incorporate it into your style of teaching, right? And that's something that the more I teach, I see teaching in everything. I listen to stand-up comedians talk about how they design a joke, and I apply that concept to composing, and then I apply that to practice, and then I apply it to performing. You know, you hear, you know, listen to someone who's a great actor or painter or whatever. Anyone who creates or anyone who teaches has something to offer to us as students and performers. And I think, you know, I used to feel like as a teacher, you know, once you're a teacher, you're done being a student. But actually, when you're a teacher, you're a student always, because you have to find the best information in order to stay relevant and to do a great job for your students. And ultimately, that's what it's about. It's about helping our students achieve their goals. So thank you so much for everyone tuning in. I have a little blurb here to read, and then I will say goodnight. Tune in weeknights, Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Time, to watch Keeping the Beat live. And remember to tell your friends about our program. And then presenters who wish to apply. Okay. Yes. Presenters who wish to apply to host an episode, send applications via the TNMEA website. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good night.